Welcome to the On the Blue Line podcast. It is Thursday, September 26, 2024. Our thoughts are with all of those in the path of Hurricane Helene as it heads here towards Florida and with the potential of storm surge along the coast. So we're thinking of you all, but this week, an in-depth look at law enforcement training. The On the Blue Line podcast starts now. You break the law, if you decide to do this, we're going to hold you responsible.
You are the only good thing in someone's worst day. That is a privilege for a police officer.
At the very least, you could honor the sacrifices of police officers and their families.
We have the ability to save the Republic. All right, well, welcome. If this is your first time finding us, glad you are here. If you want to know more about this podcast, on theblueline.com, you can find all of our past episodes and some other information about who I am and what the podcast is all about. Any of your feedback, I'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to me directly at wayne@ontheblueline.com. I'm trying to make some big decisions on what I'm going to even do with this podcast, so I'd love to get your feedback. Send me an email. Let me know why you listen. If you do listen, if you absolutely hate it, let me know that. But just tell me, do you enjoy the interview shows? Do you enjoy the solo shows? Is there particular content you're enjoying? Love to get your feedback because that helps a lot in making decisions on what I'm going to do next here. And then lastly, all the podcasts are also done in video. We actually had a really good feedback last week on the episode that I did on the 6 lies that I have been told about law enforcement, and got a lot of positive feedback on that episode. And that's all on our YouTube channel. So either YouTube or Rumble, you can find the videos there each and every week. And that is at On the Blue Line on both of those. And then this week, the episode that I'm bringing you is another interview show, and this is the last of the pre-recorded episodes. So if you've been following for about the last 2 months, then you know the story. I was out for about a year after a heart surgery and had a substantial backlog of episodes that we needed to get out to you guys because I wanted to make sure that you were aware of each and every one of these guests. But then also because there's important things that we discussed during these episodes that are really, it's evergreen content. It's just as practical. In fact, the irony with some of these is they were almost prophetic in the way that what we were talking about in some cases a year and a half, 2 years ago is exactly what occurred today. So I think you're going to enjoy this episode as well. This week, the guest is Adam Kinakin. He is the host, or was the host, of the Tactical Breakdown podcast, and that project took off back in 2019, and it led to the formation of something called the International Law Enforcement Training, or ILET Summit. They had a great year in 2020 and kind of took everything online. So there's a lot of content that you can get just by going to their website. And pretty much it continued the premise of his podcast, which was to give members of the public safety communities, the emergency response, and military a behind-the-scenes look at how to create and deliver training, and then some of the things that we're doing right and some of the things that we can always do better at, right? So as you can imagine, there was a massive need for this, and the response was very positive, and it led to this summit. Because this is an evergreen episode, you're going to hear some of the dates and so forth that we are talking about. Don't be dismayed. It is still going, and it's still a great thing. So if you click on any of the links on whatever platform you're listening to this on, it will take you to the up-to-date information. And the next summit, the 5th annual, actually takes place in Davie, Florida, and it's next May 20th through the 22nd, May 2025, and the 20th through the 22nd. So just click on any of the links on whichever platform you're listening to this, and it will take you there. So I think this is a fun, meandering conversation. We get into a lot of different topics. We go down a lot of different roads, and I think you're going to enjoy that. It's very entertaining, and I'm not going to take any more time. Here's this week's guest, Adam Kinakin. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thanks, brother. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I am glad we could sit down. We've already been laughing, and we've only been talking a couple minutes, so I'm sure this is going to be a great show, and I'm sure the listeners are going to enjoy this. So thank you for joining me yet again.
No, man, absolutely. And I'll preface this whole conversation by saying I apologize if at some point a little gremlin runs in here. I have 4 children, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And unbeknownst to me, my wife decided to take off this weekend to go do some stuff. So I got the entire circus, so we're gonna juggle that as we have to.
As we should, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, we all enjoy it. I've got my little gremlin's now 20, almost 21 years old, so he shouldn't be running in anywhere. But I have two mastiffs that like to steal the show any chance they get.
Fair enough.
All right, so let's start with the easy questions for you, Adam. Coffee or tea?
I was Army, buddy. Let's go with coffee.
You know, you would think that that question would always have that simple of an answer, but it is not that simple. I mean, I'll have guys that, Army, SWAT, whatever, it'd be like, yeah, no, green tea, whatever. That's why I always have to ask that question.
That's funny.
What's your favorite place to have that drink, though? Where's that place that brings you peace where you just kind of can unplug and enjoy life?
That's a great question. You know what? I'm the kind of person, I can enjoy time pretty much anywhere. In fact, my wife gets very frustrated because I have the ability to sit down wherever I need to and literally shut everything off. And so I can sit in the middle of the living room with children screaming and running everywhere. And if I'm not paying attention to it, I can sit there and enjoy coffee and not think two things of anything that's happening around me, which frustrates her to no end. But for me, I can sit down. I don't care if it's at the lake, if it's outside on the deck, if it's in the living room, it doesn't matter. If I got a warm coffee and stuff isn't blowing up around me, we're golden.
It's awesome. That is a impressive talent. Like, can you bring that to reading and concentrating on business things as well? Like, can you?
Oh God, no! I have ADHD. No, I'm okay. I am. Yeah, no. Yeah, I have very, very bad ADHD. And so the term we obviously used, and very common in this space is shiny object syndrome. But that's just the way it is. So no, do I have the ability to focus in on things when I need to? I don't have the ability to focus. I have the ability to not focus on anything.
Perfect. Okay.
Is what it is.
I may share that quality, but yeah, no, when everything's going on around me, nothing's getting done because I'm like, what in the heck is going on here? Let me ask you, Adam, you got a best or worst travel story?
Best or worst travel? Oh, geez. I don't know. Work related or non-work related. I have a recent travel story, I guess. I had the opportunity to go down this summer. I did a bit of a road trip. And so it started, one of our partners here at ILET is NAFTA, the National Association of Field Training Officers. And they were running their conference in Louisville in June. And so I actually had the opportunity to drive down. So I drove down to Louisville and I made some stops along the way and stopped in Chicago and saw some folks with like Force Science and Caliber Press. And I drove down and I saw some more folks in St. Louis and then over down to Louisville. Had a phenomenal time there. The amount of bourbon that was consumed probably shouldn't be spoken of. Right. And then I drove down to Tennessee, which was fun for me because it was the first time that I had a chance to ever go to the Jack Daniel's distillery. I've been a Jack Daniel's fan forever. And so I spent some time there. And then I spent some time with some friends in Tennessee and then back up and did all the stops along the way in KC and everything back up. And then the second I got home, 8 hours later, I jumped on a plane and flew down to Florida for another conference. So it was a hectic 3 or 4 weeks, but there was I got to see so many people in such a short period of time. It felt like I did years worth of travel condensed into one thing. So that was a really cool experience this summer.
That's great. And that's some beautiful parts of the country too. I got another of these questions for you, but let's jump in there to a little bit of your backstory because you're saying you came down. So let's let the listeners kind of know where you came from and a little bit of your story, and we'll kind of weave it together from there.
Sure. Yeah, it's funny with ILET and with everything. Obviously, we work a lot with law enforcement and folks in the United States. I'm actually, in fact, Canadian. So I'm up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Right now, for reference, it is -3. So what would that be? That'd be 26, 27 degrees for you guys. And I'm still going to push to have you guys join the rest of the world and and use the metric system, but I don't know if that's ever going to happen.
We have this conversation every time we talk, Adam.
Every time. Sorry. So my background, I was former Canadian Forces. I was an infantry officer, and I ended up being the training officer with our regiment. I've always been involved in martial arts, defensive tactics my entire life. That's been something that's been fun for me, and it kind of all melted together. I ended up injuring myself. Well, I should say injuring myself, but I was injured when I was with the military. Ended up with a pretty significant spinal injury. Ended up releasing, and due to my release, and the injury at the time, I wasn't comfortable trying to jump into something like law enforcement or public safety or anything like that, just because we didn't know where the injury was going to go. So it's resolved now, and this was many, many moons ago. Still some permanent damage there, but I can still go jits when I want. I can go do all the stuff that I need to do, but everything circled back around to all of the relationships that I had built in my time as a trainer, as an instructor, working with police, working with military, working with private sector. And in that time, I just like to say that I was always in the right place at the right time. I was always introduced to the right person, and it just so happened to be some of the best trainers in the world. And so I took advantage of that. I started a podcast, Tactical Breakdown, in 2019. And the concept of that podcast is it was training. It was talking about training. It was talking about, when we're on the range and there's a really cool drill and it's like, hey, cycle through this. And then you spend 5 minutes, you're like, wow, I really feel like I got a lot out of that. That was really cool. Let's run it again. I want to take the 5 minutes of training, and now I want to go back and talk about the 80 hours that went into building the 5 minutes of training. Because a lot of times the front facing, the end user from the training perspective sees what we want them to see. They don't see the process. And so I'm a huge fan of Simon Sinek. I don't know if anybody listening to your show is familiar with who he is.
Sure they are.
Okay, so he wrote the book Golden Circle, lots of different things there. So many things from his teachings that I draw from, and I love the concept of the why. And so that was kind of what the podcast started, just more from the training space in the law enforcement military world, right?
Right.
And I, at the same time in 2019, we had our first kid, or second, third, I don't even know what number we were on. We are whatever kid we were at.
Honey, how many of these do we have? Yeah.
My wife was, I had to, you can't, I don't know if you can see that. You won't see this on the audio. I have actually my kid's birthday is tattooed on my arm, so I don't forget them.
There you go.
Again, that's, it makes the most sense. At the same time, everybody was staying at home. I was working from home. My wife was staying at home with the kids as the caregiver. And, she wanted to do some online stuff with different businesses with her background. So I ended up doing a whole bunch of things online and learning a bunch of things. And then I had this concept because at the time, and again, this is pre-COVID, there were virtual summits that were taking place in other industries. And virtual summits is essentially taking a conference and putting it online so that people can access it remotely, right?
Right.
We know that now. 2019, that was a foreign concept. And so we started, I started reaching out to all of these instructors that I knew, right? And Tim Kennedy and all of these folks that I knew would be like, hey, these are big draws. Like these guys, like people will come in and listen to these folks. And then what I did was I reached out to people that I knew were the best in the world at their thing that maybe nobody even knew about. And the thought was, well, what if we put something together that allowed everybody to access, even if they'd never had access to that person before or didn't know that that information existed? Because, and I'm sure you're aware, especially in North America, you can go even a county over and agencies will not work with one another. They won't share training. They won't share information. And
they can be in the same county because you can have cities and city governments within that county and they don't communicate with each other.
Right. Absolutely. And so that's one of those things that it was really interesting to me because I wanted to take somebody from Arizona who is an expert at what they do and show them to people in New York, or show them to people in North Dakota, or show them to people in Toronto or Australia. And conversely, the same thing. So what I wanted to do is put this event together, and that was all built out by December 2019, January 2020. And so we were sitting there, we're like, okay, how are we going to put this all together? Didn't even know if it was going to be successful because, like I said at the time, especially in this industry, that was unheard of. And so, of course, COVID hit, and we're sitting there, and I'm like, well, geez, I guess might as well hit start on this whole thing and just kind of see what happens. We launched it. We did our first summit July 2020. We had over 10,000 officers from 76 countries attend our first event.
Wow.
And so that was unexpected. It was a bit overwhelming. We ended up raising, actually, we decided to donate all of our profit to charity. So we ended up donating a lot of money to our friends over at Copline. And if anybody here who's unfamiliar with Copline, they're a phenomenal organization. It's a crisis line, a resource for active duty and retired law enforcement and public safety. And the cool thing that they do, and obviously I didn't come here to pitch Copline to everybody.
But it's a great resource. So absolutely,
Adam. The one thing that they do, and this kind of goes back into your first question of one of your questions there about my background. One of the things that they do that is different than anybody else right now is if you call them, you're speaking to somebody who is a retired police officer who has been trained in trauma and crisis response, and is able to understand what it is that you're talking about. At least relate to you on the basic level of, we've both done the job. I understand what you're going through.
Yeah.
Right. At least to some extent. I thought that was so critical. And the reason being is when I left the military, obviously with injury and all of these things, I cycled through, therapists and professionals that I was speaking with to kind of to put back together my life at that point, because that's all I had was the military, and that transition was very difficult for me, specifically because also obviously here in North America we are very heavily reliant on opiates when it comes to dealing with injuries. So I was very chemically dependent on opiates, and then when I was trying to get off opiates, I was self-medicating with alcohol and all of these things. And I don't mean to say that like it was a drawn out process. It was maybe over the span of a year total, but in that year it was very difficult. And so I would keep going to these people or I'd be putting in touch with these professionals. And every time I'd go to them, they were never former military. They were civilians. They had no idea what it is that we did or what our jobs were or what we saw or what, all of those things. And so you would have to spend the first however many hours with them just explaining the basics of our job, essentially, right, so that they could understand. And then so I could even get into the shit that was going on. Right. And so my personal experience with that was so frustrating that when I heard about what Copline was doing and saying, hey, no, listen, we want people, if you pick up the phone, there's going to be somebody there that understands, at least at the very minimum, what it means to do the job that you're doing. Yeah. And then that way you have a starting point. And I thought that was so awesome. And that's why we supported them. And we've supported lots of organizations since that first event, but that was kind of the first one. And it's just a little interesting segue to go down.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm glad you shared that. Yeah, Copline's a great, there's some great resources out there now, thank God, because they are more and more coming online. But yeah, Copline is one of them that is really great. And what I love is, like you said, because that's part of the problem or the stigma that we find, especially among I can speak to law enforcement officers because I wasn't in the military, but I'm sure it's a similar thing there, where when you're talking with someone who hasn't shared this experience and hasn't seen the things that we've seen, it's very difficult to have these conversations with them, because there really is at least a perception of them not understanding what it is that we've seen and what it is that we've been through. So yeah, no, that's a great resource. And I really am thankful that not only are you sharing it, but you guys are doing such great things to raise money for them. So let me put a pin in the story here because I want to break some of these down one by one, some of the great things that you did. But let me go back. So this road trip of yours, so did you come down through Michigan or did you come down from the Northeast or how did you come in? And then where I'm going with it from there, because you drove through what I consider, so I was born in Michigan and grew up in Indiana. So I consider these some of the most beautiful parts of the country in my very not objective opinion. And so, in fact, my brother actually lives in Louisville, Kentucky. So that's beautiful country up that way. My second question I have to ask, did you do the tour at the Jack Daniel's distillery? Because I've never done it and I've got to hear more about this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, I did the full tour, the whatever the premium package they had there was. That's the one I went on. They where you get to the higher shelf type stuff. Nice. But no, it was a phenomenal tour. I mean, it's obviously very professional. It's very they obviously do it a lot. Like it is this pretty smooth running operation that they have there. I think they run a tour every like 6 minutes. Jeez. So it's fairly extensive the way they have that built out. But it is neat because even though they run that, I went on a weekend. So they actually like nothing was all up and running. They weren't really working or doing anything there. Yeah, I guess they run it during the week and you know, everything's moving the way it normally would. Like everyone's doing their stuff. And it's kind of cool the way they just kind of give you open access to it. Obviously, some places they're like, you know, the funniest thing is, and I don't know if it's just me or if it's, you know, I don't know how to say this. I hate people. Like there's just certain people. I don't know if it's just because of our experiences or what. Yeah. It's like you go there and they're like, no photos. No, it's like, because they're taking us into a room to show you something, but it's part of like, you know, they show you how the sausage is made, right? And they're kind of like, don't share this. And now, is it something that their competitors probably don't know? No, but they're still like, just please don't. And obviously there's different things with lighting and the certain chemicals and different stuff that they have depending. And you're literally in there and she literally goes, okay, no photos or videos in this area, like very clearly to everyone. And people pull out their phones and you just sit there. You're like, what are you doing?
Right.
Like it's like, you know, I know you've had this. It's like, you just really want to slap somebody and you're not allowed to. So that was a part of my experience, but overall it was phenomenal. I loved it and would definitely go back.
Awesome. And highly recommended, it sounds like. So to all the listeners that make it up there to that Tennessee area, they definitely have got to go. I think this whole hate people, at least in that humorous context, is definitely something any law enforcement officer shares. It's just that part of humanity. It's like, what in the heck are you thinking? And I don't know how many times I've almost articulated that even like on scenes or during traffic stops where you're like, at what point did this seem like a good idea to you?
Right. Seemed like a good idea at the time.
Exactly. All right. So my last of my get to know you questions was going to be, what is the top one or two training books that you would recommend? And then I'm going to dovetail this into kind of what you're doing with ILET. But what are the top one or two training books and why? And I know you've got hundreds. Like I heard you on one talk about the top 10. So yeah, boil it down. I don't know if this goes on video or not, but if it does, folks will see these are all training books. For the most part, there's some stuff in there from like things that I find enjoyment in reading, like on psychology and serial killers and stuff like that. I know that sounds really weird, but that was what my background was when I was in university. There are a lot of really, really great books. Training at the Speed of Life is a phenomenal book. Training is such a difficult one to parse out because they're so specific. Right. So I can find training books or information that is useful for any subsection of what we want to teach. So I can go back here and I can pull out, books on use of force training and reality-based training or systems-based training or whatever it is. Like there's so many different things. I have one right here. I was going through it. Training on how to actually deliver presentations, right? Like
how to be a presenter, how to speak in front of people, how to engage, how to develop learning and attentiveness, how to do all of those things. There are a ton of resources available. But what I would say, and not to skirt your question, because obviously there are 1,000 books that we could talk about.
Right.
What I will say is this. Find a topic that you're interested in, that you want to be. So if it's just training in general or whatever, don't get sucked into the bubble of, oh, this was written by a cop for cops and I'm going to use it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
The amount of resources that are available in this world right now that do not have to do anything with law enforcement, military, public safety, or anything in that realm that are directly applicable to what we do and how we teach is astronomical.
Yeah.
And so I would recommend that for obviously the with your listeners and my listeners and knowing the kind of the core demographic there, if I were to recommend anything, I would say start looking at information that is outside of what you would usually look for. And so look for books in areas that have nothing to do with what you're wanting to talk about, because those little outside pieces of information will either confirm, right, your thesis on certain topics and say, oh yeah, if we're doing it here, they're doing it there, it obviously works. They're going to challenge some of your preconceived thoughts on, is something a viable method or not? Because they'll say in one industry that this doesn't work at all. And we'll over here, we'll be like, well, we've been doing this for 15 years. And then you go, where's the disconnect? And that's going to send you down a rabbit hole.
Yep.
And those are so valuable because it challenges our thought process. It challenges us to think differently. And if we can think differently, which is also there's a book called Think Differently. It's also a very good book. There's lots of things like that are very useful. And so, I mean, we have reading lists, we have all of those things. And if any of anybody's listening to this and you are interested and you want like very in-depth resources and reading lists for topics in law enforcement training, like in anything you need, please feel free to contact me directly. I'm happy to send those off to you. We have them all kind of queued up already. But yeah, man, sorry to kind of skirt your question, but I think it's important to bring those topics up.
Yeah, I don't think you skirted it at all. I mean, obviously, it may not be a specific answer. However, I think you are absolutely right, because that's how we shift the paradigm. That's how we begin to change, some of this thinking where, well, we've always done it this way. And, that can go on for decades and decades of, well, this is the way we've always done it. Well, that doesn't mean we've always been doing it right. So, no, I love your answer. And I will also have all the ways for people to contact you and connect with you in the show notes. From here, I kind of want to segue into this whole, so during your time as a training instructor and then obviously into what you do now, what are some of the issues you're seeing? So, obviously part of what ILET Network does is it solves a problem. What's the problem that you saw?
One size fits all. If I were to boil it down to one thing that is the bane of my existence, it's the one size fits all mentality when it comes to law enforcement training. Right now, and like I said, I want to go back to the fact that I was never in law enforcement. That isn't my background. And so I come into this industry a little bit differently than most that are conducting a lot of law enforcement training. I come into it obviously from the military perspective, and then from the educational side of things. And so when I came in, I tried to connect with as many people as I possibly could and not hyper focus on one thing, which is kind of the magic as to what led ILET to be what it is now. When it's called the ILET network being the key term there. It is that. It's a community, it's a network, it's a family. It's collaboratively coming together to say, hey, this is the best thing that we know that exists right now or that we're aware of. Let's share that. And so to your question, what is the issue? It's one size fits all. It's the fact that they're an agency will, and by no fault of their own, because right now across the United States, across Canada, and around the world, obviously due to the last 2 years with the pandemic, and now obviously rolling into what is going to be probably a worldwide type of recession. Yeah. There is no money. There's no money for training. We're short-staffed pretty much across the board in everything. I talked to the folks out at Colorado Department of Corrections. They're running at like 60%. Jeez. You know what I mean? So it's like it's difficult to accomplish what we need to in training. And what's happening is we see solutions because companies will create a done for you, one and done. Here's a piece of training content that you can use. And somebody in a small town in a different state will say, oh, well, Kansas City is using this, or, Dallas is using this, or New York is using this. Therefore, it's got to be vetted. It's got to be good. We'll just use it without any forethought into, has this training been contextualized for our area, for our community, for our department, for our policies, for our procedures? Does it meet our case law within our state? Right? Yeah. Does it? There's so many considerations, but what happens is it gets punched out and it says, my favorite buzz line of the last 2 years is de-escalation, right? It's been the buzzword since George Floyd, right? De-escalation training. I will tell you this right now. If I walked into any police agency in North America, and there's over 17,000 in the United States, we have under 1,000 total up here in Canada, which is hilarious because we have more landmass than you.
Right.
But
yeah, that is.
I could walk into any police agency and say, show me what you're teaching for de-escalation. And I would bet that the 95% of them would be different.
Yeah.
It is because it's so nuanced to the individual communities, right? And whether that's breakdown through racial demographics or religious or ethnicity, language, there's so many different variances that we have to look at. Where if I took de-escalation training from, say, like Winnipeg Police here, right? That training, outside of some basic core concepts of what to do and what not to do as like hard guidelines, it is going to be completely different than if I take it down to just down across the border to like Minot, right? Like it's so different because the communities are different and the agencies are different. And I think that's my biggest pet peeve in this entire industry is this one size fits all. Let's just buy the training because they're using it over there and we'll just make it work for ourselves, right? Or even worse, I can understand when it's done under the auspices that somebody's going like, oh, I've done, like, whoever's made the decision truly believes that it's going to assist and help. And they're like, this is the best that I can do. I do not fault those people at all whatsoever. They are doing the best with what they have available to them.
Right.
What is more frustrating is when the decision is made purely off of financial considerations, and it's handed to the training division and they say, make it work.
Yes.
Right? That is very, very rarely ever successful. And so those are the things that with ILET we're trying to combat. And by combat, I mean opening up everyone's eyes to seeing that there is more than the 3-foot circle that you're used to operating in, right? It's other people are doing different things in different places. It may not be wholly applicable to what you're doing, but I bet you there's a piece of information or a speck of knowledge somewhere that you can use to either bolster your abilities, right, to assist in what you're doing, or to help you change your thought process and do something differently to be more efficient or effective. And so, a great example would be the very first summit we ran in 2020, and we're coming into our third this year, this December right away. And I ran one of the sessions was with Dr. Patrick Tidmarsh. He's out of Australia. He works with child sexual offenders.
Okay.
So he specializes in that realm, and God bless that man, because what he does, he sits in and interviews and runs groups with these child sexual predators. That's what he's done. And he has gained so much information from that. But I told him, like, the first time I talked to him, I said, well, I couldn't do your job because I'd end up with a cell of my own within about 5 minutes.
Right.
But he created this whole story methodology. It's an interview methodology specifically designed for the mind of child sexual predators, right? It also works for child sexual assault victims, which is very interesting. And so, obviously this man is very, very smart, and he came up with the system, but it is so nuanced to a very select subset of what we do, right? And so we put it on, and I remember distinctly getting an email from a detective in New York, and I won't say who it was or whatever, but it was essentially I'll try to abbreviate what he wrote. He basically said, I've been a detective for 25, 30 years, whatever it was. The fact that you think you could put training online and tell me how to do my job is laughable, blah, 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 blah. This is not how we do things here. Da, 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 da. You shouldn't be showing this to any officers in America. Da, 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 da. And I go, you missed the point.
Right.
Like, you missed the point. The point wasn't for me to say, take your 30 years of experience, uproot it, throw it in the trash, and adopt this other methodology. Like, that's not what we were saying.
Right.
What we were saying was, here is something that works, that's been proven, scientifically backed, that is happening somewhere else in the world that you may not even be aware of. And so maybe you work a special unit. Maybe you work major crimes. Maybe you do something and you end up in an investigation with a child predator, and you end up hitting a brick wall and you don't know which way to go. Maybe, just maybe, you could implement some of the pieces from what they've developed in Australia,
right,
to get you over that hump, to break the case. That is what that was for. And so it's funny to me that we still have this mindset that you can't tell me how to do my job. I know what I'm doing. And I'm not here to tell you you don't know your job or don't know what you're doing. What I'm here to tell you is that you are limited to your own knowledge and experience.
Yeah.
You're limited to what you have been exposed to in your life. And if you haven't had exposure to other areas of thought, we can't fault you for not having that. It's not your fault. But what we want to do is give people the opportunity to dive into that, and maybe it will help them in one way or the other. And so that was kind of the concept of the summit as it first began. It's obviously evolved since then, but that was a great example to illustrate the point of why one size fits all doesn't work.
Yeah, no, I think that's powerful. And there's so many things to comment on there. Starting in the ending, though, that's the whole problem we have right now. In society, especially, and I'm sure it's similar in Canada, but down here in America, is this whole echo chamber thinking, right? So you don't think outside, kind of like your example there, where here's this guy in New York that's like, well, this is my world, this is all the training I've received, and this is the only way to do it. And you do essentially create an echo chamber of sorts. You know, it becomes self-fulfilling. It's the only thing you know, and you never actually reach outside there to understand, well, there's something else out there, and maybe it's not 100% something we would adopt, but if we adopt this little bit here and this little bit here, it's going to make us stronger. And that's not only an issue in the training environment, it's an issue in the societal environment as well, at least in my opinion. Yeah,
there's and in the training space, there's another analogy that I can use. And I didn't come up with this. This was another instructor, and his name's slipping from me right now. I interviewed him at ILET earlier this year, and this is what he told me. He said, imagine we have a training course, and it is like, as we know it today, it is the best that we can design. Okay. And it's a square. So the training course is a nice big square, nice sharp corners, and it is the best of what we have. So we go corner to corner, top to bottom, and we cover absolutely everything that we can. The learner gets every piece of information that is contextualized to what they need to do the job, right? What happens in our training space right now, and I like to call it the inbred training model, is I have instructors who train instructors, and then those instructors train their instructors, and their instructors train their instructors, and their instructors train their instructors. And you end up with this cycle where at no point do you ever go outside of this little bubble to rebuild and refocus exactly what it is that you're doing at your instructor development level. So to go back to the analogy of the square starts as a square, but then when that course as a square is taught to the next instructor, what is inevitable to happen is those corners get rounded just a little bit, right? Just a little bit. And then when it gets taught to the next person, it gets rounded just a little bit more, because those little nuanced things that are so specific usually are the first things to get dropped. And so all of the nuance, all of the contextualization, which is the critical component for implementation, is dropped. And so over a period of time, as this course is taught and you go through the instructor phase, student phase, instructor phase, student phase, it goes from a square, and over time it ends up being a freaking circle, because everything gets whittled away. So it's not even the same thing that you started with.
Right.
And I was like, that is such a phenomenal visual to explain to people why we cannot do things the way we've been doing them. And so anyway, that's the first thing that jumped in my head when you said that.
Yeah, that is a great analogy. That is an absolutely powerful analogy. And you are right. And it's not just training, but so many of these things, our entire model is very incestuous. We don't leave this small group and one teaches the other. But let me, devil's advocate, just for a moment, I want to push back just a little bit and ask. Absolutely. So you've got so many agencies, and using the U.S. as an example, because it's very compartmentalized, which I personally think is a good thing, because that's America's a different model. The U.S. is a different model.
It's a constitutional republic, in fact, which the majority of your citizens don't even understand. But that's
thank you very much. Yes, in fact, yes, I couldn't say it better myself. So since we are a constitutional republic, this separation is extremely important. But that being said, that does create issues when we talk, like when we talk about especially in the law enforcement world, because you've got, when you say law enforcement agency, you could be talking Dallas, Texas, you could be talking NYPD. I just interviewed a guy yesterday with 20 years at NYPD, and his experience there versus some guy in nowhere, Wyoming, is completely different. The resources are different, the people are different, the training's different, et cetera. So going to those smaller agencies, and maybe not as small as a small town in Wyoming, but let's say a mid-size agency in the U.S., one of the kickbacks to this, okay, we agree with you, Adam, we want to step away from this one-size-fits-all, but besides exposure to different training that's out there from an international perspective, how then can that small training department, because they're going to kick back and say, well, we don't have the funding for this, how can they then zero that into where it's specific to not only their state regulations and so forth, but even their community, depending on what circuit court they're in, like it needs to be so nuanced down to that exact area where they serve. How do they do that when they're going to say, well, I still have the same budget problems, regardless of the fact that you can expose me to something out of Australia? What would be your response to that?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and that's a phenomenal observation, because you're right on the money, right? There is when we talk in hypotheticals, right? Hypothetically, it would be great if we could do X, Y, or Z, right? That's how I work. My brain is always like, well, we're just going to change the world, so screw everybody else. Like it's for me, it's very simple, right? Because I'm just like, screw it. I'm just going to do it until it works.
I like it.
But there are the realities that we run into, right? We run into those brick walls, right? And it happens very, very regularly. And what I would say is this: Google exists. Okay. And when I say that, I say it to mean 20 years ago, if somebody said, yeah, well, we don't know how we can do this, I don't have the resources, I don't have the connections, I don't have whatever, I'd be like, okay, makes sense. If somebody says to me right now, oh, I don't know how to get this, I'm like, bullshit.
Right.
I'm sorry, but if you're sitting somewhere right now and you're like, well, we just don't have access to that. No, that is just false. You do have access. You're just lazy. Right. And I know that sounds a very abrupt and harsh, but what I want to get out of that, and I'll dive into it here, is when there are specifics that we need to understand, right? Let's identify, though, who is the holder of that information and knowledge, right? So Is it my local DA? Is it, does DOJ have representatives that are agency adjacent or liaisons within our department, within our county, within our state, whatever it is? Because I guarantee you, if you have to break something down to the minutia of a legal argument, specifically for liability or litigation purposes, you're going to have people that are available to you. Right. You just have to go out and ask for the help, right? A big problem in our industry is we don't ask for help because, well, we're all type A, right? For the most part. So asking for help is usually very, very, very difficult for some people. The other thing is, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, the fastest way to affect noticeable and meaningful change in this industry as a whole, so that we can better serve our communities and keep our officers safe, is raising the quality of instructors. There's nobody else right now inside of a department that has more influence over officers in that department than the instructor cadre. Yeah. Starting at academy, FTO, and then working through in-service. Those instructors are the linchpin to our ability to do this job correctly and safely. And that is, it doesn't cost a lot. And here's the interesting thing, and we're doing with ILET right now, and I don't want to talk shop too much about the company because I want to talk training with you. But one of the things we've implemented because of this is we have an entire research and innovation working group, which is going to be evaluating training efficacy so that we can actually determine from a scientifically backed perspective, from an evidence-based perspective, and we can show, just not through correlation, but through hard numbers, that by training instructors to a certain degree and to a certain level, you show a noticeable change in effectiveness in the officer, which shows a reduction in liability through use of force incidents and other things, which end up at the end of the day, if we reduce the liability for the department, it increases cost savings at the end of the year through civil litigation. Yeah. Right. Huge. And so if I can show that to an administrator who doesn't give a shit, she doesn't care if Wayne has X amount of years on the job and he's literally the best person in his entire state to talk about his subject matter. And he goes to his chief and he says, "Chief, we need to do this. And here's why, X, Y, and Z. I know this like to my core." They go, "Cool." Passes up to whoever counts the beans and they go, "I don't care who Wayne is." Like, I don't care what his experience is. That doesn't affect my job any, because that it's the context isn't aligning with their understanding. And so what we want to do is we want to play the 4D chess game, shift the narrative, take the foundational theory, apply it to something that those people understand, the administrators understand at their level, whether it's dollars and cents or spreadsheets or whatever they want, and showcase it to them in a way so they agree with the theory. Right. And then we contextualize the theory and show them implementation strategy through training. And then they go, "Oh, I get it. If I spend an extra $50,000 this year training our instructors end up getting a 30% increase in effectiveness of our officers, which reduces our liability by X amount of dollars. And that $50,000 we just spent this year is going to save us $5 million within 24 months. Right. Cool. When do we start? Right. But we get so sucked into our own little minds of, well, why don't you listen to me? I know what I'm talking about. Right? I'm telling you, this is how we have to do it. And for some reason, we don't want to do the workaround, right? We don't want to do that flanking maneuver that you have to walk an extra 10 clicks around to get it, when you're like, well, I could just go straight at these people and just keep hammering them and see if it breaks. Right. And so that is one of those things from a training perspective that I think is so hypercritical. And for those small agencies, we work with OSPDA, the Ohio Small Police Department Association. They have 750 or more agencies in Ohio of 25 officers or less.
Wow.
Right. And so those are exactly who we're talking about. Yep. You have the agency. Maybe it's a team of 6, and your chief is also your canine guy, who also does all your major investigations, who also does traffic. Like and then you have your trainer, who's like, all of the hats that those folks wear, because that's just the reality of what they're doing.
Yep.
Do they have time to go and do these massive instructor courses and to build? No. Like, let's be realistic. No, we don't. So again, time and money, right? Do we have the time and money to replace this person? Do we have the ability to even replace this person? Can we pull them out for a certain period of time? Can we do that? Can we backfill them? Can we pay them to do that? All of these things that we have to consider. So if the answer is no, does that mean we just throw in the towel and say, well, I guess screw it, we're done? Like, we'll just have to continue on status quo and hope bad shit doesn't happen.
Right. I
think that's a really bad game plan. I don't know about you. And
Absolutely.
So what we want to try to push in this industry, and it's not just me. If you look at our partners list, it is growing exponentially by the day. And it's funny because in the training space, I like to think of the law enforcement training space like high school. It's very cliquey. It's there's so much high school drama in this space. It's really hilarious. What we have as a rule as ILET is there's no drama. You either come in here and you agree to work with everybody else, or kick rocks. Good luck on your own.
Right.
That's it. It's you either come in here because you want to share your knowledge, or you don't. And it's very telling who wants to share their knowledge and who doesn't want to share their knowledge. And one piece that I will bring up here, and it's something that I've come to realize in this industry over the last 5 years, the people that are the most willing to share their knowledge and experience are the people that are the most competent, the people that are leading the charge, that are doing the research, that are contextualizing the research, that are putting all of the pieces together at the tip of the spear, as an analogy, in that specific niche. And so they're the ones that are like, I just found this out, I want to share it with everybody. Right. And they'll come on podcasts, and they'll put training out on YouTube for free, and they'll share it with as many people as they can, because there's people in this industry right now that are training just to train because they want to get money, which is fine. I get that, man. And everybody's got to eat. I have no problem with that. Capitalism, 100%. I don't care. It's all good. But the people that are the best at what they do are usually, not everyone, are usually the ones that are open to sharing their knowledge and information. And so with ILET, what we've done is we've tried to find those people, and we're still searching for more and more every day. And we wanted to create a platform. We wanted to create a communications net that allows those small agencies to have access to those experts. So as a trainer, you may not be able to go to a 40-hour methods of instruction course through Force Science that Chris Butler just developed, which is probably the best instructor training course that exists on the planet today. You may not have the ability to do that. But you know what we can do? Why don't, if you have a question, you're building out a course, you're getting stuck with a learner, a student, you need to try to find a way. You just got tasked with doing some new type of training and you've never done it before because you're the only instructor at your small agency. And now the state has come down with a mandate saying you have to train this. And you go, I don't even know what that is. And instead of just taking the PowerPoint that was delivered to you because the state says, hey, here, use this. And you go, okay. And everybody sits down and you go click, 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 click. Everybody good? Yep. Sweet. Check the box on the road. That was a waste of an hour, right? There was no point in even doing that. You might as well just forged everyone's signatures on that training piece and just moved on, because that was the effectiveness of it, right?
Yep.
So instead of that, what if we found a way for that instructor to just be able to come into a platform and just say, hey, this just happened. Does anybody have any suggestions, or can anybody assist me in doing this? And I'll tell you this right now, the majority of my day to day is connecting people. And so an instructor will reach out to me and say, hey, Adam, do you know anybody in this space who's done X, Y, or Z? And I go, I'm not sure. Let me look. And I'll go and I'll check out the connections that I have. And I'll say, oh, you know what? I'm not sure, but I'm going to reach out to this person because I bet you they will know. And then they will say, oh, yeah, this person is the person you want for that. I go, great. I talk to them. I connect them with the person who initially asked the question. Now they're connected. And now the instructor that needs the information now gets it from the person who's best qualified to help them on that topic. And to this day, I have never found within our network somebody who is not willing to jump on a call, to share a training document, to walk somebody through building out a training package for their officers.
Yeah.
Trainers want to train. We're here to help people. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing. It's not like we get it's not like you get extra money.
Right.
Like it's about doing the right things for the right reasons. And that's what this industry is. And so how do these small agencies get access to this training? One, you have to know where to look, and you have to be willing to ask. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. It's as simple as that. I made the joke earlier about Google. Like your first step is Google. How do I do this? Right?
Yep. Now,
from our perspective in our industry, a little bit more nuanced, obviously, because if you're like, hey, I need to figure out how to set up comms for this UC op, that's not going to be on Google. Right. We know that. But what I want ILET to become is a resource hub for things like that. So you're an officer, you're a trainer, you're like, I need help with X, Y, or Z. You come to us and all you say, and it's not me or ILET, it's the community. Yep. It's the network. And you go in there and you say, I have a question, X, Y, or Z. And you're going to have a dozen of the top experts in the world in that subject matter there to basically help you out with whatever you need. And it's not just US based, because there's other things that from other countries, other places, regionally, nationally, internationally. There's so much information out there that we need to be able to share. And that's kind of at the core of what we're doing. And the reason we're doing that is for the very specific question that you asked, which was, how does this work for small people, agencies that just don't have resources? It's designed for small agencies that don't have resources.
Yeah, that's great. And that's what I love about what you're doing. From the first time we spoke, I was so happy to have you on, because I think what you're doing is going to really make a difference globally. A couple things. I don't know if we ever mentioned it, but just so the listeners know, ILET stands for International Law Enforcement Training. So just so they know what that acronym is, since we keep saying ILET. But yes. Just so they are
acronyms. Familiar. It's our favorite thing.
It is. Military and law enforcement alike. We have to use acronyms. Just a quick curiosity question, and then I want to dig a little deeper. I know we're getting short on time, but I want to dig a little deeper into ILET and a couple things you got going on. When you talk about that research and innovation training group, I love that you're going to look heavily at causation rather than just simply correlation, digging into kind of the empirical information that supports a decision. May I ask how? So how are you going to derive this empirical information? And not looking for how the sausage is made here, more just in how are you going to get that empirical data? Are we talking?
It's a phenomenal question. I have a very simple answer for you. Okay. When I sent the email out to our initial invitees to this group, okay. Mm-hmm. And these are folks from Canada, the US, the United Kingdom, and Australia. And I go in there and I invited everybody. And after I listed all of the names of the people that are involved, so everybody knows who's who.
Yep.
I put in a little brackets. I said, I have decided not to include anybody's doctorates in this, since I don't have one. and I'll be in the back of the room chewing my crayons. So essentially, what I said, this research innovation working group, are some of the top researchers in this field in the entire world.
Okay.
So they are the best of the best of the best. And they're lead scholars for folks in the United States, so you'll understand the NIJ Leads program. We have Dr. Chris Cushion out of Loughborough University in the United Kingdom, who rewrote the entire training program for the UK and Metropolitan Police Services, and are going through a research project implementation through instructor into now application of the training from instructor training to instructor to student. So they're doing those research studies right now on the efficacy of those training methodologies. We have the team, access to the entire team at Force Science here in the United States, who is very adept at conducting research specific to contextualizing data and science into how does this work for law enforcement boots on the ground. We have the team of Simon and Craig out of Carleton University up here in Canada, along with Dr. Peter Shipley, who ran who was a training and curriculum director for the Canadian Police College.
Okay.
We have so many folks, and that's just a small list, but those are the ones that are just popping off in my head, of extremely competent and qualified individuals that do and know research, that have the ability to contextualize it to law enforcement and allow us to understand those research parameters. If I were to sit here and pretend like I knew anything about how to conduct research, I would be blowing so much smoke, you wouldn't be able to see me right now. And so to answer your question, I don't have the answer to your question. All I know, here's what ILET is. ILET is Adam having an idea of, hey, this is my grandiose 10,000 foot view of what would be really cool if we could accomplish it. And going back to something core that I learned when I was a very early on in my military career, when I first got my first platoon as platoon commander, my CO sat me down and he said, it's not your job to know everything. It's your job to figure out who knows what they need to and put them in the right spot so they can do their jobs.
Yep.
Right? That is what ILET has become. I know what I'm not good at, and that is a majority of things. You want me to go, hey, listen, you want to go out into the mats and you want me to show you how to choke somebody out 20 different ways? I'm your dude. Love it. Every day. Let's make it happen. You want me to explain research concepts and how to implement research into a FTO training program? Nope.
Not your guy.
not can't help you. But what we can do is let me show you the people that do know how to do that are doing it at the highest levels. That's what these groups are. It is a working group of experts outside of me, outside of ILET. We just facilitate it, and then we let them do what they want. And the cool thing about it is, like I said, these groups, these people that are in these groups on their day-to-day have such a variety of experiences. They work for federal agencies, state agencies, municipal agencies, they're military, they're retired, they run their own training companies. If they run their training companies, a lot of them are in direct competition with one another in the real world.
Right.
Everyone works with us to help establish a baseline so that as an industry, we're doing things the right way. And that's kind of the cool thing behind it. So it isn't an Adam show. I can't answer some of these really in-depth questions. I wish I could. I'm just not smart enough. I am just smart enough to know that I don't know. And I put the right people in the right spots.
All right, Adam, before I let you go, I got to ask you my question that I ask everyone that comes on the Blue Line podcast, which is, what is the one takeaway, the one thing that law enforcement officers can do that's going to make a difference in their personal lives?
Well, I'll give you the one thing that they can do that's going to help them in every aspect of their life.
Okay.
Learn how to think critically. Learn about critical thinking and decision making. Yeah. And if you think you're an expert at it, you're not. There's always something to learn. There's always something to do. And the reason I say that, somebody asked me the other day, they said, if you had one thing if you could only train an officer in one thing, One thing only. That's all they got. They were brand new, and you could only show them one thing before they have to go out on the street. What would you teach them? And it's critical thinking and decision making, right? Everything that we do in life falls under that. It's not about the skill. It's about the application of a skill. So it doesn't matter if you have it. If you don't know when to use it or how to use it, it's not useful to you at all. We can apply that in our personal lives in 1,000 different ways, right? We can apply that in our professional lives, and it's very easy to draw the connection there as well. But because when we think critical thinking and decision making, that we usually, the connotation of that is usually work-based, right? It's about, hey, I'm on the job, I got to do that, but it's understanding, like I use that concept when I deal with my kids every single day. I use that concept when I have arguments with my wife, right? Yep. I have to think very quickly. I want to say X, but if I do, here's what's going to happen because of it. Here are the repercussions. Now I have to shift. Where do I want to get to? And now I have to work back through, okay, if that's my end goal, let's start there. How do I work my way back? And where's my starting point now to get to that end goal? What's the workaround?
Yeah.
It's the same thing when we're de-escalating a suspect on the street, right? My end goal is compliance. How do I get to compliance? Well, it's going to be, there's 1,000 different ways to skin that cat, right? How do we do it safely, effectively, efficiently? Same thing in our everyday life. I got to get over here. How do I do that? Right? There's a lot of cool like mind games. There's a lot of training things that you can get. There's puzzles. There's different things that allow us to start recognizing patterns, to start recognizing things, to recognize patterns, identify, utilize patterns, and then learn. And if we can get to it, actually create patterns. This is something so I listened to Tony Robbins, have started recently, just like little snippets. I can't handle him in like big doses because I'm like, I can't do it.
I'm with you.
He said,
I love it, small doses as well.
I watched a snapshot of him just the other day. And he said, life comes down to patterns. First thing you need to do is learn how to identify a pattern. So if you can't identify a pattern, there's not much you can actually do, because once you can start seeing patterns in the chaos, you have a starting point. Once you learn how to identify them, then the next step is learning how to use the pattern and follow the pattern, right?
Yep.
And then once you have those down, the next step and the most advantageous step is then learning how to create your own patterns. So seeing a pattern, being able to utilize the pattern as it exists, and then identifying a new pattern that is more advantageous than what you've already been able to identify.
Yeah.
That's critical thinking. That's decision making. But we have to train our brains to do that. And there are a lot of things that go into that. But if there's one thing I would recommend for people to do to just better their lives as a whole, that would be it.
I love that. That is a great answer. And just like the answer you gave earlier, it really comes back to this applied knowledge, which really leads to wisdom. So thank you so much, Adam. What is the best way for people to connect with you?
Anybody can shoot me an email any single time. It's Adam, ADAM, at ILET.network. So that's the easy email access. ILET.network is the website. Again, ILETSummit.com. We are so open, transparent, and available to folks, Wayne, to be honest with you. If you connect anything that has associated with us or the podcast, you have a way to connect with me directly. So I encourage people to do so. Questions, comments, concerns. If you want to just yell at me because you think I've been talking out of my ass this whole time, that's cool too. It's important to take criticism as well. And there's a second point to your question. You know what I'd teach people to do? Learn how to take criticism. Because that's severely lacking in our society at the moment.
It absolutely is. And by getting differing points of view, it only makes us better. So, Adam, thank you so much for this morning. This has been a great conversation. You've got so many great things going on. This is the second time I've had a chance to meet you, and it's truly been a pleasure. So thank you very much for coming on.
Absolutely, brother. Thank you. And looking forward to having you on our show. So we'll talk to you then.
Sounds good. Thanks. All right. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Like I said back at the beginning, this is the last of the pre-recorded episodes. So everything after this is fresh. It's not from the dusty archives. I'm not having to pull them out of there, get the cobwebs off of them. None of that. It's all fresh material. Now, that also means that we have to hope things like the storm that is bearing down on us here in Florida allows me to get this recording done and that I'm not out working in the streets, because as many of you know, I'm also in law enforcement as well. So we're going to hope for that. There will be a new episode next Thursday. And in the meantime, I'm going to see you out there on the Blue Line.